Rave to the Grave.
Welcome to Rave to the Grave. My guest on today's show is Kurt Eckes, also known as DJ Jethrox, merry prankster and rave outlaw of Milwaukee's drop bass network. In the 90s, Kurt put the state of Wisconsin, America's dairyland, on the map for something other than cheese and prairies and the Packers. Kurt threw some of the wildest raves in the Midwest, probably the whole United States, especially his weekend campout festival Furthur, where he invited Aphex Twin, Richie Houghton, and Daft Punk to play long before the rest of the world even knew who they were. With the Drop Bass Network record label, Kurt and his friend Woody McBride cultivated the sound of Midwest hard acid, hard techno, and hardcore gabber, putting out records that are still pummeling dance floors from Berlin to the Ukraine. Kurt has been at the center of satanic rumors, FBI investigations, and cult controversy over the years, as he's refined a Wisconsin rave aesthetic that's equal parts heavy metal, LSD humor, techno-paganism, and the truly hardcore. And I called him up at his compound, which is on a literal farm in the middle of Wisconsin. Kurt and I talked for a long time, and so this is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you missed part 1, do go back and listen. Welcome to Rave to the Grave. Some point during this era, you kind of had a reputation that people thought you were like satanic or like a devil worshiper, or somehow drop bass became associated with this. Was there one event or one thing that happened that made it that way?
It was 2 things, yeah. So like we were talking about the Spiral Tribe before and like those early techno-pagan vibes they had going on. And I think it was from like one of those articles that, those English papers that I read where they referred to it as like a techno-pagan ritual, We did an event in 92 called Tempest, which had a lightning on the flyer. It kind of had a darker flyer, So it was called Tempest, the techno-pagan ritual. So the next party that happened was that big bust, The news crews were going undercover to the party before the big bust one, the Tempest party, so they're recording our voicemails and like going through the process of getting into Tempest. So like after the grave bust, they kind of look like, we're on top of this underground scene. We've been investigating it for a month, as in fact, our reporter went to Tempest, so then they play the voicemail on like the 6:00 news, it's like, you've got information for Tempest, a techno-pagan ritual, with like beats banging in the background, that kind of shit gets you excited, you're like, holy man, I'm on the news and I sound like a badass, and it's like Milwaukee death metal and all that stuff. So we did that hardcore party then in 93, then in 94 is when like the whole Plur thing, was coming in strong. And I was just kind of like not feeling that. And the only way to like really not feel that is just to do the opposite, So I did a party called Dissension, and it had like the Eddie from Iron Maiden, the devil from the Number of the Beast album. It was right before Furthur. That's actually where we started promoting the first Furthur, was at that party. So we were combining like the acid with this satanic vibe, and everybody fucking, hated me at the time. Like, you go to parties in Chicago to promote and they wouldn't let me promote, and I got in multiple fights with promoters, like, because I was handing out flyers with Satan on them, like, this isn't what this is about. It's like, oh, relax, it's like, so from there, and we just ran with it. There's 20 promoters and 19 of them are Plur. There's all these people that identify with these 19. They're all fighting for those people. Like, we got all these people over here to ourselves, because there's nobody else promoting the devil, It's like Kiss and all that stuff, It could be satanic, but it's not, and that's kind of the way we were too. It was just sort of like the Satanism was just a metaphor for like pushing that boundary, taking it a little farther than maybe what you're supposed to. I'm not spiritual, religious, any of that, So it's like I wasn't taking it seriously, but the first dance music I was listening to was like The Cure and Bauhaus, and Kult, stuff like that. It's all like the darker stuff. That's just sort of what I identified with, Just if it feels good, this is what I'm going to do, and you're either into it or you're not. And luckily being a Milwaukee promoter and quickly everybody adapted, the devil horns is like our rave sign, but it's like nobody was like actually deviling anything, but it was just being like the Alice Cooper, I guess, the Motley Crue, the Kiss of rave. You're always going to have haters. Just make it easy for them, like, they don't have to like go looking for anything to hate about you. Here, boom, you can hate this.
How many parties total have you done with drop bass?
It's like around 100. Over 80 of them were in that first era or whatever.
What was your favorite out of all of them?
I mean, there's a lot of them that are uneventful. I think Richie Houghton has played for me. He's my fucking hero, just as far as like no one can throw a party better than him. He's my hero that way, like he knows what he's doing and how to make it happen. And a lot of the stuff are things I've learned from him, how to set up a party and just like how we have a crew and how we all represent. It doesn't need to say Plastic Man when you see the Plastic Man logo. You just know that that's Plastic Man. Same with the Drop Bass logo. It doesn't need to say Drop Bass Network. You just know that that's Drop Bass logo, Getting back to what your question was, is like, what are my favorite parties? The majority of them are revolve around things that he's been at, just for me to be able to show him what I'm doing, he could see that inspiration, that I'm inspired by him or whatever, and but then when he comes, it's not like he's just showing up at another gig, he's showing up at a Drop Bass Network gig, and he's going to be like the best Richie Houghton that he can be. And like, a good Richie Houghton is great, but the best Richie Houghton is fucking amazing, So it's like, he's played live for me as Plastic Man once. And, even though that party got shut down, like just the whole experience of it, putting 2,000 plus people into a warehouse that should have only fit 1,000, the cops showing up to shut it down, and there's a super long story about that, like it was basically me just saying like, oh yeah, fuck you, I'm going to do this anyway, try and stop me. And they did. But when they showed up, my girlfriend at the time at the door, like trying to charge the police to get in, and she wouldn't let them in because they didn't have wristbands, and they're like, we're the fucking cops, and we're just like, you need a fucking wristband, it's $20, and it's like, no, that's not how this works, and then them finding like the power box, and turning the power off, but like 2,000 kids in a dark warehouse filled with black plastic is not a safe environment for the kids or the cops, so turning it back on, just playing games with them, so like those kind of parties are legendary experiences, and all the Furthers have like stories like that too. Everyone talks about Further 96 a lot because of Daft Punk. But I mean, for me, Woody and Dave, it was a fucking nightmare. The whole party sucked, it was just like from the weather to the production problems to everything that we were going through to make it happen was like super difficult, so it's hard. Like I left that party on Monday morning alone in my van with like some sound in the back of it because for one of the side stages, got 3 miles, pulled into a field and slept for like a day and a half because like I was just done. That's not a glamorous ending to anything, So it obviously wasn't a glamorous party, but like some of the other Further parties, like the Little Further that Richie played at, which was like an illegal party. It was capped at like 2,000 people, and I think if you 1,900 of those people that were there will say it was the best party they've ever been to in their life, because it truly was, and it's like even the party that we did this year, I probably shouldn't even talk about it because of the year that it was, but we did our festival anyway, but that's a whole nother story. But like the way we did it and just like how we picked people to come to it and be part of it, people that are really connected with each other, and just realize they're part of something bigger, that the moment is like something that they're going to be reflecting on in the future. Like those are the ones that are like really stand out because that's when people like take it to the next level. Like Further in 2016, when we brought it back, that was like 2,500 people that hadn't raved for 10 years, releasing a lot of pent up energy, getting to relive that one period of life where they were actually happy before they had a mortgage and kids and jobs and all that stuff, just break out the pair of Jenkos, for the weekend, and it was muddy and it was all the things that it should have been, Luckily, like, cause I'm a lucky bastard. Like I said before, I have a lot of those like that, and I think I throw good parties, but part of it is just giving people a place to create, and whatever that creation is, whether it's art or dancing or music or the way they decorate their camp, whatever, it's like just letting people like express themselves is when it all comes together, and makes those magical moments, I guess, if you believe in magic.
I think a magical thing has to happen between all of these elements that are like kind of uncontrollable for a party, especially one with a couple thousand or more people to come together and actually go off.
It's totally something you don't plan, it's just like, we put it together, sell the ticket, meet you at the front gate, tell you you're going to have a good time, and we'll see you on the way out. Like from that point there, like it's not us or them or the DJ or whatever. It's like all of us, so it's like get to work, it's like Burning Man, they want everybody to participate, not spectate. We don't have to say that. People just do that.
Yeah, I think that's like a huge element that is why parties now, or things that are calling themselves raves, don't necessarily feel like they feel right, is because I don't think people feel like they need to participate in the way that used to be a part of the whole thing. There's a lot of standing around and like taking pictures on your phone and like texting.
That's just like this Instagram lifestyle, that people live. They just want to see the things that happen and record them or whatever, but they don't actually want to like be the things that happen, and it's funny even talking about that. Like when we brought the Furthur back in 2016, like I had gone to, concerts, and stuff. You see all these people on their phones, and just like recording, and nobody living in the moment, everybody just living for this fucking recording that they're never going to watch again, So it's just like, what's the point, So it's like we made a bunch of signs that were all tongue in cheeky, just about like, be here now, live in this moment, nobody wants to see you naked, there were rules, but we didn't want to make them feel like rules. There's a lot of promoters that like have like these no camera rules, like clubs, bear kind and stuff like that. Like, and part of it working was there was no cell reception where we were at, so like people had to disconnect or could disconnect. And I think like that's the problem with like these big EDM festivals and stuff, is everybody's focused on the fake DJ up there and what's on the video screen and all that. Even at these last couple Furthurs, I got rid of the video from inside the tent and all this. I put it on the outside of the tent because I don't want people looking at anything. It's just like, all you're in here, we got 60 bass bins like in the front. The DJs are both hid. We had two stages operating. They're hid behind the speaker stacks, so you can't really see them. Maybe a little bit. Minimal lighting. And it's just like, you're in here because this is where the music is at. There's nothing for you to see. You're in here to dance or go outside. It's not hard to curate those kind of environments, but like everybody thinks everybody wants all this flash and go, but I don't know that they really do. People just want to let go. They don't want to see all this stuff.
You obviously have a high threshold for the weird, but what are some of the craziest or weirdest things that you have ever seen somebody do at a party?
Yeah, I mean, there's good weird and then there's bad weird. But like the bad weird is like, someone freaking out on drugs, thinking that they should jump into a fire, and like lighting themselves on fire, and then chasing this person around the campground and then them being life flighted out of there, So like that's definitely weird, but not a good weird. I'm okay with a one and done weird on that. But then there's a lot of good weird. And like one of them, I mean, I just off the top of my head is like when you're talking about Dan before, like those guys, they were in a group called Meat, and they were sort of at like the peak of their like figuring shit out at Furthur in 99. We had two side stages. One was called Piss on Your Parade, and I forget what the other one was. They're both noise stages, So one was all these guys like Bogdan and Venetian Snares and like a bunch of IDM kind of guys, push button objects and stuff. Richard Devine. It was all just experimental music, you know? Somehow we had all these side stages, and somehow the attic stage got set up in the middle of the camp, which is the last place you would want their stage to be. And like I said, that was sort of at the peak of their like, let's just call it a mental breakdown for lack of a better word, you know, where they just fucking went all out, you know, like between the campground and the main stage, everybody's going by. They got this giant setup, and they went on right before the fireworks show. And then the main stage was going to start at the fireworks show. So Dan's up there in a prom dress, blood pouring down his face, sticking meat up his ass. Stunt Rock is there smashing his face with like a 55-gallon drum, you know, bleeding all over himself, you know, and they're drinking piss, you know, just playing like obnoxious, hard, experimental, like, and everyone's just standing there like in shock, you know, in a crowd, you know, 1,500 people, the biggest, you know, a huge crowd of people. But at the time, that party we had to hire the sheriffs. So the sheriffs were going from the front gate to go secure like the fireworks area, which was at the racetrack. So they're walking by meat. So they have to stop and see what the crowd of people is about. So it's, you know, the sheriff's department, the county fair board, and like the neighbors that were working the bar and stuff, you know, a group of like 20, 30 people, you know, all square or whatever. And it's just like, oh my fucking God, like if they see this, we are done, you know? So I'm like on the radio, you know, to the fireworks company, start the fireworks now, you know? And they're like, no, permit says at 12 at midnight or whatever. It's like, I don't care. This party won't be on at midnight if you don't start these fireworks now, you know? So the fireworks started at 11:50 instead of midnight, you know? So like meat's going on, all these people screaming, a giant, you know, $5,000 fireworks show is, you know, the meat thinks is for them, so they turn it up a notch, you know, and the sheriff's like, oh shit, we got to get over by the fireworks. You know, for some reason they started early, so they didn't even, you know, see the scene that was going on. But it was just like this chaotic moment that got more chaotic, that could have been really bad for everybody, but turned out great, you know? It was just kind of like a happy accident moment that was just like, freak flags were really flying high at that moment in time.
Yeah, something you briefly mentioned, but like we should say about Furthur is that you let all these different record stores or promo crews or whoever would have their own tents. So actually like a lot of different people would get to DJ.
And this rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but it's like I'm a big proponent for this this collective consciousness that happens like in a main tent, you know? Like, so it's like at night when Furthur's happening from like 10 p.m. until 6 in the morning, that's Furthur. We're all going to be in the same place. There's only going to be one thing going on, and we're all going to be part of it, whether you like it or not. You know, whether we're listening to Laura Grab at 4 a.m. or Daft Punk at midnight, we're all going to be in there vibing together, you know? But like all day, you can all be your own little stars everywhere, you know? So it's like, yeah, we let a lot of crews bring sound systems, which promoted, you know, like the development of crews, which is part of that whole like big pond thing that I was talking about before. You know, you just want to give new crews a place to shine or whatever, you know, and you got a stage at Furthur. It's kind of a big deal and whatnot. And but that sort of kind of got out of control by 98. It was, we had like 30 some sound systems there, you know, so then it's not a daytime Furthur anymore. It's a technival, you know, so it's like, okay, this is, you can't go anywhere without hearing like all this sound bleeding over, you know. So then we started like picking sound systems to where it's like the way we do it now is we just have 8 sound systems that go during the day. Now, like everybody's a DJ and everybody owns sound. So yeah, we got a lot more rules about it because people's personal sound systems are like, you know, 20 and 30 bass bins. So we don't need that for like a daytime sound system.
We mentioned that you had rebooted Furthur, but when did you stop and what years did you take off like in between? When was the last Furthur before the reboot started again?
Well, the last Furthur was in 2001. And that one was that was like just, it was great Furthur, you know, IF was there, Mixmaster Morris and Neil Landstrom, you know, Tech Itch played. Yeah, it was great Furthur, but there was a ton of problems because it was an illegal party again. You know, we did it on an outlaw biker property. And again, where I just got like the right person to give us a note, you know, but it was like it was in like the newspaper every day and on the news. And it just ended up like a bad deal for everybody involved, you know. So I just kind of got sick of like always chasing this unicorn, this venue that was going to work out. 2002 was the RAVE Act. I was kind of a little bit over everything, because it was kind of getting smaller, drifting into the clubs and stuff like that. And we kind of dabbled in the club a little bit. Didn't feel right. It wasn't us. So I was like, shit, I don't really have a place in this anymore. But then when the RAVE Act happened, all the parties I had done before that were all completely illegal parties. And it just seemed like if you want to prove a law works, you need examples, and I just didn't want to be an example.
You knew that you were at the point where you were going to be one of the first examples.
It's weird even, thinking about it now, because we did that our 10-year anniversary party at this abandoned theater in Racine, which is a city south of Milwaukee. And like the police showed up in the morning, and that's when I told them we were doing the video shoot thing, like as a joke, and they didn't bust it. But then the very next party that happened in Racine, right across the parking lot, in a more legal venue than what we were using, they raided, and gave everybody fines just like they did in 92, like at that other party. And the ACLU got involved, and it would just turn into like this big nightmare, and it was like, I wasn't naive enough to think that couldn't happen to me. And if it did, it was going to be ugly.
Can you explain what the RAVE Act is and what it felt like to you at the time?
The RAVE Act is really it's like an expansion of the crack house law, which basically the person who like is not dealing the crack at a crack house, like the person who owns the crack house has held liable for what's going on in there. And I guess similarly, so then they expanded the RAVE Act for electronic music events that, like if we gave away water, or if there were, people with glow sticks, or, people were doing things that were indications that drug use was going on there, like then it made the promoters liable for that drug use. The fines weren't any joke, it was like, $250,000 fines, I think, and, years in jail. It's like they had test ran it on Donnie down in Louisiana before it was the RAVE Act, I believe. I think it was still the crack house law then. And my understanding in dealing with the ACLU, that was millions of dollars just for him to get out of that situation, All music, is secular. Is that the right word? I think.
Cyclical? Circular?
Yeah. That's the word. All music is that, and scenes are, so it's like, our music was doing the same thing, it had reached its peak and now it was like on the down. It wasn't going to go away, but it just wasn't going to be what it was, so it was like, it was on its downswing, and at the same time, it was right after 9/11, all the distributors like shut down, and like shipping was shut down, like as an indirect result of like 9/11, because all that stuff was based out of New York, so it's like, first it was Syntax, then another one, then also Watts closed, so like all the dance music distributors were going away, the record stores were going away, digital was coming, it's like everything was, all these things lining up, for like our music was taking a little rest, and I think the RAVE Act for me was just kind of like the final nail in the coffin at that time, where it's like, I don't need this shit anymore, and I was just over the label and I was just over everything, and it was like, then all these things were going bad and I was just, fuck this, I'm throwing the towel in, like it was a good run, 10 years, like is a decade, Motley Crue just put out Decade of Decadence. Like I can relate to that.
There was also just like, people were fried. I mean, people who had been throwing raves for so long were tired. I felt like the parties at that point too, like the ravers were pretty fried from, years of like drug use, and just like things were kind of like falling apart a little bit.
You got to regroup, and you're not going to regroup if you're in it. You know what I mean? So it's like, when you're talking about ecstasy and stuff before, it was like around that time also is when MAPS was getting like the first permissions, to do testing with ecstasy. And I don't know how it was related, but it was that like, there was this mini flood of like pure MDMA, so like all this shitty speedy MDMA that was going around was now replaced with like what was in 92, but actually even better, So it was like, it sort of like reignited the potential for like the abuse of like that and meth, and it wasn't just like the cool drugs anymore. It was all the hard drugs, and like people actually started dying then. And at the same time, like I had this warehouse in Milwaukee that I was living in. It was underneath the freeway, but I had gotten eminent domain out of there, because they were redoing the freeway. So I was like, yeah, I'm moving to the country, like I'm going to get as much land as I possibly can. And with this buyout that I'm getting, and that's what I did, but then when I moved and that's where I'm at now, it's just like, well, I don't know if this was a good idea. Like, I don't know anybody out here. Like, I don't know anything. I just got a lot of land. So I guess that's cool, but I got a job with this natural foods company, got a job with them in marketing. So I ended up working for them for like 10 years, like doing like tours and trade shows and like, all their events all over the country, and ironically, 4 years of that was like driving a bus, like on these bus tours, that were taking farmers around to go to Ivy League schools and talking to people that are going to be the policymakers in the future about why organic agriculture is important, and like why they need to keep that in the back of their mind, which tying into like, you're just trying to affect the future, like at the ground level, which is what raves were doing. That's what we were doing with like organic food. And then it hit me like I was doing these trade shows, and it was the same kind of thing where I'd stay up for like a week straight, like getting all the property together for these trade shows, shipping it out to like the convention center in Anaheim or wherever the convention was, going out there, setting up the trade show and like working the trade show the whole time, and then breaking it down, taking it home, being there, for 2 weeks straight, realizing that everybody on this trade show floor is on drugs. Like basically this is a rave for organic food, like I'm doing this like, multiple times a year, like, holy shit, I'm still raving, there's no music. We're doing it with food. And it was all kind of like tied together too, because the company that I worked for was like a product partner with Nancy's Yogurt, which is owned by the Kesey family, which is Ken Kesey's sister, the electrolytic acid test, so it's like, I got to meet the whole Kesey family, taking over all my Furthur like flyers and swag, saying, hey, I talked to Ken and Zane, in the past, and like, they gave me permission to use this and stuff. I want you guys to see this and share this with you, It's just like, yeah, how it all kind of like intertwined just made me realize, even though like I wasn't doing it, I was still doing it, It wasn't hard to get back into it once I did.
So, what were the different challenges of throwing Furthur in these times compared to way back when?
The biggest challenge I think right now is just promoting. I love raving all night and then standing there on the out and handing flyers on the way out. It's like people see me, people talk to me, you're handing them the flyer. I mean, that's the way you should promote a party, And now people just look at you like, what the hell are you handing me? Like, why? I don't get it, So like all these ways of promoting now just don't make sense to me. And you're always just fighting, social media algorithms, trying to like figure out how to get the most bang for your buck, and then you get all this like false sense of, you got, holy shit, I just got 50,000 views like on this thing that I posted, which means, 5 people are going to show up, or if I go to a rave party and I hand out 2,000 flyers, you're getting directly to the people, that you need to get to. We promote that movement and stuff like that. Half the people don't get it, and the other half of the people totally appreciate it, but they ain't driving 12 hours to a party, The other big challenge is where talent is at now, I still try to do everything direct, and not avoid agents, but try to just make the initial thing happen directly with the DJs and stuff like that. But like once you're dealing with all these agents, it's not just an agent either. It's like a manager, an agent, tour router. It's just like all these I's that are dotted and T's that crossed. It's just bullshit that doesn't matter, because like what we talked about before, like once you get inside the front gate, all that stuff that you want to make sure was going to be taken care of probably isn't going to be taken care of. Like it's just that's just it's chaos. It's like that's what it's supposed to be. Come here and like play some crazy records for or not records, files for a crazy crowd. And all the DJs have left these new Furthurs thinking, holy Christ, that was a shit show. Garth, from the Wicked Crew, one of my biggest heroes, is like messaging me after the party saying, I want to come back to that. And everybody's like that, we show them a good time. So like that's the other challenge, is like the talent part of it. And then plus like all the parties that I did in the 90s, or not all, the majority of them were illegal on some level. Whereas now it's like these last four furthers were legal parties. And like I was looking at the paperwork for the Further 96 with Daft Punk. It's like we didn't get that venue until like the first week of May, and the party was Memorial Day weekend, 4 weeks later. So it's like we were promoting it for a couple months before that without a venue, but it all happened in a month. Whereas like Further now, it's like I start the process with the county in January, like where I'm submitting applications. And then, by the time you submit the final proposal in March, and you have a meeting with them and you go through like their approval process and then a follow up. It's like I'm working on it for 10 months, to get less than 2,000 people, whereas I could get like 4,000 all day long, 5,000 or whatever in the 90s. So it's just so much more work for less monetary reward, but the parties are way better, because now that they're legal, we don't have noise complaints and stuff like that, so now we can build the parties that we wanted to build in the 90s, but we're afraid to. So it's now we can have obnoxious sound systems that are giant, and as long as we're under this dB at this distance or whatever, we're good. There's nothing you can say.
You said something interesting in an email to me, which was like that you didn't like to use the word rave back then, but you love to use it now.
It's weird, isn't it?
Can you explain to me a little bit more about why you didn't like to use it back then?
I think when it first started, you use rave just because it differentiated yourself from like loft parties or, these other things that were going on. But then right away, rave was associated with plur, and just like the candy thing, it just felt cheesy, because and you had like those things, like the rave till dawn things, it's just like rave, it just seemed like you were doing underground parties, but like everybody knew what a rave was. So if we were calling them raves, we weren't really underground anymore because everybody knew what that was, So just like, I just call them events then. Once I came across the bang face parties on YouTube, the mid 2000s or whatever, that was all rave, and it was like, so it wasn't tongue in cheek either, it was like, they were fucking serious, it's like, and it just felt good for some reason, and it didn't feel as like dirty as it did before, even like this poster that I got back here was from like the Further in 2016. It's a play like on the John Lennon thing where it's the war isn't over if you want it. And we just changed it to rave isn't over if you want it. For whatever reason, you can laugh at yourself a little bit without being uncomfortable with it when you're in your 40s, So it's kind of, there's a little bit of clout, I guess, associated with it when you're a veteran of it, when you can use it and mean it.
I wanted to talk really quickly about the drop bass label. We talked a lot about the parties, but there's also a record label called Drop Bass that has released a lot of tracks that, interestingly enough, before pandemic happened, I was started to hear again in Berlin clubs. I feel like there was a real explosion in people playing Midwestern hard acid sounds from the 90s. Like I definitely heard some Hyperactive and Woody McBride kind of classics.
Absolutely. Like it's weird because like Nina Kravis, like she's licensed some of these tracks from me, to put on like mixes that she's made, like Charlotte DeWitt and like Amelia, like they're playing like these songs that sound like, and they probably were like made by Woody or Paul Berkin or Freddie Fresh. Midwest acid is a thing. It's weird. Like a guy from the UK just sent me a mix recently. Like he was a fan and he's got most of the records on vinyl or whatever. And he asked for permission to do a radio show. And I was like, you don't have to ask for permission. Just let me have a copy of the mix when you're done. And it was like a 3.5 hour mix, that he did. And I'm listening to it and I'm just like, I couldn't even believe like, half the songs were Drop Bass Network songs. Like, it's like, I hear these songs. I didn't realize this was one of the songs on my label, cause like, there's like 100 releases on the label and all the sub labels, and we're just now starting to like go through the process of digitizing all them for our Bandcamp page. But I've only done all the domestic artists, so it's like I've been pretty well familiar with all those tracks because I play a lot of them or have played a lot of them a lot over the years. But yeah, now that we're starting to go into this other stuff, it's like realizing there's a lot of gems in there that people still play, like they play them like at different speeds now. And then because of like digital technology, you could play them 20 BPM slower and it doesn't sound weird, because they can fix it or whatever.
Yeah, there's pitch correction built in. I don't know. Back when we would just play stuff on 45 or 33 and it would like sound bad, but we liked it that way.
Yeah, there's this one UK label, this hardcore label that's pressed at 45, their EPs, and nobody presses EPs at 45. All of the 90s, I played these tracks at 33. They sounded darker and a little more evil at 33. But now I'm like in this Facebook Gabber group or whatever, and they're talking about these records and they're talking about the BPM. And I was like, what do you got? They got it all wrong, and I look them up on Discog, like, oh my God, I was playing those records for 5 years at the wrong speed and didn't even realize it. Like, they don't sound good at the other speed. Yeah, the label's cool because it was Woody's idea. I'm not sure why he asked me to start it, but like, it was just another outlet for his music. The first few releases were by him. At the time, it was, again, just like being lucky, like getting hooked up with Ron Murphy to do our mastering and Archer Records to do our pressing in Detroit. These are the people that mastered and pressed all the early, techno records that came out of Detroit, all of the underground resistance stuff. Everything that was original techno came through those two guys, two places, just sounded different. Like, everything we had was putting out, even though it was hard, still had like this influence by like these guys that made just things sound warm and, more techno, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, So like our first record, it was a magazine called Front Page in Germany, which is a rave magazine. They did a review on it. They loved it. And Watts Music was like, well, a Front Page just made your first release album of the month, like, you're a real label, and it just hit the ground running. That was 93. We were just really lucky to be in at the ground floor and starting out with like a legit producer like Woody. And not to sell myself short, it's like I had the idea of like, making them colored vinyl, putting them in clear sleeves, using a black letter font, so it stood out, just so it looked different than like all, the records that were coming out of the East Coast or even the other records that were coming out of Detroit, And it was great. Like, those first 10, 12 records were all Midwest artists, just showing the world what this Midwest hardcore was all about. All the labels that inspired me, like the Labworks and Overdrive and, Force Inc. and all these labels, like the artists that were on those labels were getting our records. The next thing you know, like, they're all sending me demos, Adam Bayer's first record was on Drop Bass Network. Nobody knows that because he's fucking a superstar now, but like, he still had something early with us, and there's a lot of artists that are like that. It's like after we went through like our whole first wave of Midwest producers, it's like all the first demos that we were getting were from Scandinavia, from like Denmark and Sweden and Norway and stuff like that. So it's like, it is weird. Like, even though, there's that metal thing that we were talking about before and that whole vibe, like, for some reason, even on the techno side, like that area was attracted to Milwaukee, just naturally,
I feel like the Drop Bass label really worked in tandem great with the parties, but it also just definitely put a stamp on like what you were pushing with this Midwest hardcore sound. For non-US listeners, people tend to know LA and Miami, maybe in New York, but you say Wisconsin and then people just draw a blank of like what is this place? And like the Midwest in general outside of Detroit and Chicago. So I think it gave something new to like the imagination of what was going on in American rave music. Who were some of the people that kind of influenced your sound or what records you were buying in the beginning?
Well, like I said before, it was all Heather Hart, and the Sonic Groove guy posse, like Jimmy Crash and Adam X and Frankie Bones, like what they were playing and what they were selling on the East Coast, just what I got, into. My background with buying music was always trying to buy everything, So like when would buy labels, I would buy everything by industrial strength, whether it was good or bad, or everything by Rotterdam, or everything. But so like I would just try to be completist with these collections. It wasn't always just necessarily about buying a sound. It was just buying labels that I supported. So, but you get exposed to like a lot of different music that way too. And you're buying them all like, when you're buying them off the Watts list, you can only say hard acid, so many ways, not really actually that many. Hard acid is it. So that, and everything just said hard acid at the time, so you can't hear them because you're just looking at a facts, and they didn't have like that listening option then. It was basically, yeah, just reading. There's a ton of DJs in Chicago, but very few of them were playing what we did, or, like by the time Mike Dearborn and all the DJX guys came along, that was a little bit later. We had already been established by then. So we weren't being influenced by that stuff then. It was just all the East Coast people mostly, and just in like the magazine I mentioned, that Front Page magazine, you're reading. It's so weird, like how, now everything's all instant, it's like you can go and listen to the track, go and find out the whole history of the label and everything, whereas back then it's like waiting months, to get a magazine, to read it, and then you got to order it, and then the record comes in later, nothing was that quick.
Yeah. It's interesting how these cities that are not so far apart, but everybody developed their own unique sound. Like Chicago doesn't sound like Detroit, doesn't sound like Milwaukee, doesn't sound like St. Louis. Not that St. Louis is that close, but you know what I mean. Did you have any funny encounters with DJs back in the day when you were calling them up saying, "Hey, I'm Kurt, I'm from Milwaukee, will you come play my party?" Like there must have been some pretty funny like culture clash situations when people would arrive in the middle of like this field in the middle of America from like, I don't know where, Paris or wherever they were coming from.
It's funny you say that, because I was just talking kind of with Frankie Bones about this recently, where it's just like that. Holy shit, you were just in a van with Aphex Twin for 4 hours driving to the middle of nowhere. Like how surreal must that have been? And it's like, what the hell did you talk about? Or like weird moments, like people not knowing Milwaukee and our address. And I always put pictures of our dumpy house where Drop Bass Network was headquartered out of at the time on our records and stuff. It's like several times people have shown up, they just wanted to go to Milwaukee to come visit Drop Bass Network. And it's like, oh wow, you're let down. Like you just came to Milwaukee for no reason, And as far as the rest of it goes, I think, none of these people are, at that time, they've all played the same type of illegal parties over there. So it was, even though you're in a field in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin, it's not any different than playing, like an underground party, in The Hague or Frankfurt or wherever, I would assume. I don't know. Nobody's ever really said anything about that, I guess.
But they don't have a cheese castle in the Parisian countryside with football shaped cheese.
One of the few DJs that I picked up was those Spiral Tribe guys. So most of them are getting picked up by friends of mine and stuff like that, because I'm busy putting a party together. So like whatever weird things happen in the conversations, like I don't ever really get to experience them. I've had thousands of DJs play for me in the 90s, but I didn't really meet any of them, like I met them, paid them, showed them when to play, or told them, had like brief interactions, but never really got to hang out with anyone. So like when we're doing these new parties now, it's like we have a headquarters, like a building, where some of the crew stays in, and I have like some of my friends like doing like cooking meals and stuff in there, and like housekeeping or whatever. And then, we just offer all the DJs, you can stay. We try to really downplay. You can stay at a shitty hotel 45 minutes away and you're not going to be able to come to the party, or you can hang out with us the whole time, like in this bunkhouse that we got. We got drugs and food, and like it's not a party in there though. We're just gonna be hanging out. It's gonna be cool. And like 75% of them, like, oh yeah, like I want to stay like with you guys. And it's like the only hard part is, telling them they're not going to get paid what they would at a real festival. When the people could see like the list of DJs that have played, I mean, it's really impressive. It's like, who wouldn't want to be part of that, even if it is near the Mars Cheese Castle,
How can people tap into drop bass right now? Are there any current projects or current things that you'd like to let people know about?
It was such a weird year. This year it's just all been about selling merch, which was really good this year. So I'm stoked about that. And I love like seeing pictures of people all over the world, like in different places, especially other DJs and stuff wearing like the Drop Bass Network skull. It still gets me excited every time. We have a website, dropbass.net, which is kind of cool that .net was an option, like because we're network. We have a Facebook page, our Drop Bass Network Facebook page, and an Instagram page where there's a lot of interactions there. And we have a group, this Further family group on Facebook, where it's like over 5,000 people in that, and that's just kind of a community, kind of like the old message boards used to be, like MW Raves and those kind of things, where it's just like core group people just talking shit, And so I guess it's kind of like the 90s in that respect. And then, yeah, we're doing our Bandcamp stuff, Drop Bass Network on Bandcamp. And it was a huge project. All those boxes up there are all the old Drop Bass Network DATs. So Paul Birkin, bless his soul, decided that he wanted to put all those, convert them all to digital. But 20-year-old DATs don't really sound that good, So it's like, shit, now we got to remaster every one of these. You can't just sell them like this, So it's a long process. But I got a guy, Michael Lenz, who is really into it, and he's an acid techno DJ, but he's also like a professional mastering guy too, He's got a nice studio, so he's going through them, and I'm giving them to him in groups of like 12, 13, artists at a time, or releases at a time. I really do want it to be out there as an archive, but also, like you were saying before, a lot of people are playing this stuff now too. We still do really well. And then part is opening a whole other can of worms that we're not even going to get into, but like, in order to do this event this year, we had to do it kind of like as a private thing, It's me doing one of those end around things, to try to get away with something. So we started a cult in order to like do this event this year. And that's what this shirt actually is like we worship in the church of our choice thing. It's from an old Structure record, an old acid record. So that is kind of the main thing I'm working on now. It's something me and Tommy talked about way back when, There's kind of a joking aspect to it. But then once we started it, the memberships that we offered sold out in, I forget, it was like 2 hours, it was several hundred. And then there was like a waiting list of, hundreds. And I'm still selling them now, So it's like, we got a lot of people that are in this cult. It's like, shit, now I got to do something with it, So that's like my main project right now.
Is reading a lot of books on how cult leaders get it.
Well, there's a lot of documentaries. I watched the whole Wild Country. Did you see that documentary?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like, and there's actually where I live, it's kind of a back to land area, where it's a lot of 60s hippies and stuff live here and stuff. So there's people out here that were part of that, So like I've got to talk with them. And it's not like, want to be a cult leader, like that kind of cult. But so there's got to be somewhere between doomsday cult and people that want to have parties.
What's the cult called?
A cult. It's spelled with a K. That's the name. A cult. Like there's this patch that I saw that someone sent me. It said, "Drop acid and join a cult." And everybody's been saying they've been part of this cult that didn't exist. So that's where the occult came from. It was just the ending, you're joining a cult.
Got it. All right. Well, I guess this is what we'll be doing in 2022 is it'll be the news story about a bunch of ravers that moved to Kurt's farm in Wisconsin to join the rave cult.
Well, and that's the fucked up thing is like when I did that here this summer, we had this weekender thing here, and I'll be damned if it didn't work, and it was like everyone that was here was fully aware that they joined a cult and brought their cult's A game, and now they're all sharing these ideas, based on, I guess, legitimate cults, if you would call them that. And I'm a little bit afraid of what this could all mean, but also excited, like now people want it to mean more. So now we got to figure out what that's going to mean. But you're right. You're going to be hearing about it in 2022. After this whole rave revival thing, we're going to be established. And, when we're like 1,500, 2,000 people strong, like, you're going to have to take us seriously then.
Well, I think this is a perfect place to leave this conversation. Kurt, thank you so much for joining me here on Rave to the Grave.
And thank you for playing it further in 97.
It was a great time. I'll never forget it. You've been listening to an interview with Kurt Eckes from Drop Bass Network. Just a reminder, this is part 2 in a 2-part series. So if you missed part 1, do go back and listen. Rave to the Grave is recorded at the historic Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center in New York City. The show is hosted and produced by me, Vivian Host. Our engineer is superstar Joe Hazen. Our theme song is by Star Eyes, and all additional music in this episode is by Drop Bass Network. You can listen to Rave to the Grave on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on this and other episodes, check us out on the web at ravetothegrave.org or follow us on Instagram at ravetothe.grave. Until next time, permission to party.